Good morning and welcome to another session of Advanced English Composition. Professor Kent Lee here. You may be wondering about the midterm. Well, I am still yet to grade the last essays you turned in. I'm working on it. If the last Google form about sources and source uses, I think everyone did it, and I think everyone who did it got a 10, 10 points. You're going to do another Google form soon. It's actually not due yet. It's not due for probably at least a week. And this Google form is going to help you to prepare for the midterm essay. So for the midterm, I'm going to ask you to write an essay, a short essay, an argumentative essay. I'm going to ask you to take a particular position on a topic, identify a topic, and then take a particular position on it. It's up to you to formulate your own position, your own thesis, your main point, your main argument. So I'm going to sketch out some topics. They're on the website. I might add to them a little bit. But if you go to the class website and scroll all the way down, there's a lot of stuff there. Maybe I'll try to kind of collapse some of that stuff that we've already covered so you can find it more easily. Scroll all the way down to week 6, week 7, and midterm. So there's a section there on midterm topics, and I've got a list of some possible topics for you for the midterm. And you can have some time to think about what you want to do for the midterm and choose a topic. So you're going to have a Google form assignment, and it will be, I'll give you about a week to do it, in which you will tell me what topic you want to do and what's your thesis. So it's up to you to formulate a specific thesis that is focused, it's precise enough that you can do a good essay to develop that thesis, and something that is a unique idea. It should be a unique idea of your own. It shouldn't be a common kind of position. It should be informative. It should appeal to an educated audience. It should communicate something interesting to an educated audience. So I'm also going to ask you to kind of outline maybe the main points. So what's your thesis, your main argument, something that you would present in an intro paragraph? And then what are the main points supporting your thesis? How are you going to develop your thesis? I'm going to ask you to kind of outline or sketch out or summarize your main points in the Google form. And this is designed to help you. And I haven't remembered to do this in the past, but this time with this Google form, I will make sure that it, after you fill it out and submit it, it will email back to you your responses. So not only do you have a confirmation, but you have in your email a copy of what you wrote, because you will need that. That's to help you with the midterm essay. I'll say more about the grading criteria and the length and all that. Actually, if you, I provided a PDF of the course booklet, and in the back, I might have mentioned this on in the appendix. There, in the appendix section, there is a section that's called Major Written Assignments General Grading Criteria. So you can look at that in the appendix. I'm using a previous version of my book here, what I have in my hands. So don't print out the whole book, just the sections that we're talking about if you need to, because I'm going to make changes in the book. So if you have any questions, post them in the LMS. I have not assigned the midterm essay yet. I have not determined a due date. For that, I'm going to ask you to kind of do it in a couple of steps using Google Forms first before you actually turn it in. So I will probably make the due date a little bit later than other midterms. So we have on our agenda, on the syllabus, a couple of things using sources and argumentation. And actually, I'm going to start talking about argumentation next week because I want to develop some new materials for that. Something that will work better in an online kind of context. So for today, we're going to continue talking about using sources. So in the book, there's chapter 6 on using sources. And just to review, on page 70, probably 75, section 6.1, terminology. It's probably page 75 in your version. Just review some terms here on page 75. Citation system. You have probably learned a citation system before, such as MLA, Chicago, or APA. In this class later on, we are going to look at those 3 citation systems. But for example, you're reading an academic paper and you see, for example, in parentheses, author, last names, and a year or a date, for example. Or if it's MLA, author, and a page number. That's a citation system. And it's used for citing sources. And we're going to talk about citing sources later. Periodical, again, that's a publication that comes out periodically that includes popular magazines and newspapers. And it could include academic journals too. So an academic journal is a research journal where researchers and scientists and scholars publish their own original research. And that's something you get into a lot if you go on for graduate school, a master's or PhD program. And these are peer-reviewed sources. So peer review is a sort of kind of a quality control or filtering or vetting process, like quality control, checking to make sure it's good enough and good quality and real and original. So let's say if I want to publish an article in a journal, let's say if I want to publish an article, and this is one that's published in Korea on linguistics. If I want to publish an article in here, I submit my article, my sonunmun, my article or manuscript to the editor. The editor will look at it, and based on the topic of my manuscript, he or she will then send it to probably 3 other academic people who are professors, people that the editor knows about, who are experts on the same field as my paper. Those are the reviewers. There are 3 reviewers. They don't see my name on the paper. They don't know who I am, and I don't know who they are. They review my manuscripts, and then they provide fairly detailed feedback to me and to the editor of the journal. Based on that, the editor will decide to accept or reject my paper. Or most often, the editor, if the reviewers say reject, then the editor will reject the paper. Or what often happens is the reviewers say, this is not bad, but it needs some improvements. And usually they will provide some criticisms and critique and suggestions. And then I will engage in sort of this very drawn out procedure of corresponding kind of indirectly with your reviewers. I'll make changes to the paper, resubmit it with my kind of responses to the reviewers' comments. The reviewers will look at it, and if they think it's okay, then they say, okay, accept it. And if it's accepted, then eventually it will get published in the journal. So that's the peer review process. Something is reviewed by peers, although it's anonymous. I don't know who they are. They don't know who I am until they might know when the thing gets published later. But in the review process, it's an anonymous or blind peer review. We don't see each other. We don't know who the others are. So again, a monograph is an original research write-up in full book form. And some of these books here are monographs, original research, summarizing the other research in the field, and the author presents his or her own research too. Electronic sources, these are sometimes used and cited in writing, maybe an online academic journal, for example, and there are special ways to cite some of those things. An edited volume, maybe something like this, which is in book form, but it's original research papers by different authors, and it's put together by an editor. conference papers, you probably won't deal with this until you go to graduate school. In graduate school, occasionally you might see or even write a paper where you get some insight not from what somebody wrote, but maybe from talking to a famous scholar, maybe at a conference or by email. This is not really that common. Occasionally you see it in humanities research. And a thesis, so we talked about a thesis as in like the main point of a paper, your thesis and your thesis statement. Then in graduate school, if you do a master's, a saksa, you write a master's thesis, saksa nunmun. So it's another use of the word thesis, saksa nunmun. And then if you go for a PhD, you write a PhD thesis, a paksa nunmun. Or a special word for the paksa nunmun is the dissertation. Those are not fun to do. So those are some types of academic works that we are going to kind of talk about a little bit today. Today we're going to look at some misuses of source use, misuses of sources. We're going to talk about plagiarism and fabrication. So fabrication is when somebody just makes up data. They make up results. A researcher doesn't have good results, or they're too lazy, so they just lie. They make up false data and publish it and say, here it is, I got these results. Doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it's a big scandal. Then there's plagiarism. What constitutes plagiarism? How would you define it? Because this is a word that's sometimes misunderstood. What is plagiarism? How do you define it? And if a student commits plagiarism, what should happen to the student? I want you to pause the video for a few minutes. Discuss this important question. What is plagiarism? How do you define it? What are the consequences of plagiarism? For college students, for people in graduate school, or even professors and other people who commit plagiarism. What happens? Discuss this for a few minutes. Okay, how do you define plagiarism? Well, there are two things that actually constitute plagiarism. One is copying someone's information, their data, or their words, even their words, the words that they use when they wrote their research article. That's their intellectual property. So not only the data, the information, the concepts, if it's their original concept, like someone publishes a new theory, a new hypothesis, a new discovery, so the conceptual content of a paper or book or an academic presentation, and their very words that they wrote, that's intellectual property. So one thing is copying somebody's words, or data or information or ideas, and two, not citing it, not giving proper credit. So there are two things that can constitute plagiarism. One, copying, and two, not citing a source. And we'll maybe look at this more specifically later, what constitutes not citing source, what constitutes copying words, and how do you change words? Is there a certain amount of words that you have to change if you're citing information from a research article? How much of the words do you have to change? Is it 10%? Do you have to change 10% of the words, 20%, 30, 40, 50, 53%, 56%? You can't really put a certain percentage on it and say you have to change this many words, but you should make a faithful effort that it is written in your own words. Not only it's because of the intellectual content, if you can't put it in your own words, you probably don't understand it well enough. It shows that you don't understand something well enough if you can't really paraphrase it, if you can't explain it in your own words. Summarize or paraphrase. Now the two words summarize and paraphrase are actually kind of similar, because when you summarize, you also are changing the words. When you paraphrase, you kind of summarize at least a little bit. And I might use these two words somewhat interchangeably, but generally you summarize or at least paraphrase. words and ideas and information. What happens to people when they plagiarize? We're going to discuss some examples in a minute. So if you look in your book, page 76, here's kind of a hall of fame or a hall of shame of academic scandals, plagiarism, and also fabrication. It's not likely that you'll come across examples of fabrication if you're studying in humanities, or probably not in linguistics, but it does tend to happen in maybe science fields. So there are famous examples here of either plagiarism or fabrication. What happened to these people? Some of these you may have heard of. These are famous people here. What happened to them? Do you know these people? Hwang Woo-suk, you may have heard of him, famous Korean genetics expert who used to be at Seoul National University, the geneticist who cloned dogs, very famous. Shin Jung-ah, an art person, an art historian, supposedly. Turn to Europe. From Switzerland, there was a physicist and engineer named Jan Henrik Schön. I have two German politicians here. Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, he was a German member of parliament, and Annette Schavan, also a German member of parliament. Jayson Blair, a journalist for the New York Times newspaper. Joseph Biden, have you heard of him? Did you know he had a plagiarism scandal years and years ago? I was in college at the time, I remember this. What did he do? John Walsh, you may not know him, he was an American senator. Diederik Stapel was a psychology researcher from Holland, a Dutch psychologist. Shia LaBeouf, you may have heard of him, an actor and also playwright, that is writing movie screenplays, writing movie stories, film screenplays. What happened to them? And what would happen to a college student or a PhD student or professor who got caught plagiarizing? What happens? What are the consequences? So I want you to pause the video and talk about this for a few minutes. And we're back, starting with the dog cloning guy, Dr. Hwang. He was found guilty of a few serious things, fabricating data, and also abuse of human subjects. You probably know he was the famous dog cloner from Seoul National University. Then he published research claiming to have, I think, cloned a human embryo or part of a human embryo or something, and that created a big stir in the science community. But later it was found out that that was a lie. And a team of scientists was appointed to investigate his case, and they looked into his case. The dog cloning was real. He did clone dogs, and that was quite an accomplishment. And I wish he should have just stopped there, because that alone would have made him famous. He did legitimately clone dogs, and dog DNA is complicated. People had tried it before and had problems. He obviously was brilliant because he was the first person to be able to clone a dog. But then for some reason, I don't know why, he suddenly turned to the dark side and he turned to human cloning, and he started fabricating data, making up data, discoveries that he hadn't actually done with human cloning. And he forced, I think, at least one of his female graduate students or one of his female research assistants to donate eggs to the cloning project, and that is a really bad thing to do. And for those two reasons, he actually, I think he went to jail. He lost his job, of course. He could never get a job again in a university, anywhere, ever. His career is over. After he got out of, I think he went to jail. And after he got out of jail, he tried to, I think, start or work at a private research institute and apply for government funding, but the government didn't want to give him any money. I don't know what he's doing now. He's disappeared. So he could have been famous. He kind of was famous. He could have been even more famous if he had followed the rules and not made up data. Shin Jang-ah was, I think, she was an art historian, and she had an important job at a famous art museum in Seoul. She claimed to have a college degree, a bachelor's degree from an American university. I think it was maybe from Nebraska or Kansas in art or art history. And then she claimed to have gone to Yale and she claims to have gotten a PhD in art history from Yale University. And then she got a job in Korea at an important art institute, and she was organizing a big international art exhibit when it was discovered that she didn't really have those degrees from American universities. She had fabricated her degrees, her credentials, her qualifications. She did not have any such degrees. She lied and she just totally made it up. How she got away with it that far, how she got that far, I don't know. Obviously she did know about art well enough to get a job, but I think she went to jail for her fraud, and I don't know what she's doing now. The funny thing is, I was doing my PhD at the time at the University of Illinois in the US, and I was working in a research lab for my professor, and one of my fellow lab assistants, a colleague, happened to have the name Shin Jang-ah, and she was worried about getting a job in Korea after going back because of the same name. Fortunately, she was able to get a job. She's a professor at another university in Korea. Moving to Europe, Jan Henrik Schön, he was from Switzerland. He was a promising graduate student in engineering and physics from a university in Switzerland, did his PhD. He was working on superconductors, and he was then working at a research institute, and he was publishing a lot of research papers in scientific research journals. A lot. So many that this kind of attracted attention, and some scientists investigated him and found out that he was fabricating data, including data, I think, for his PhD dissertation, his PhD work. And then he was also recycling data. So, and this is also unethical. Whenever you publish something in a research journal, like this, it's understood that this is original research and it's not been published elsewhere. That's kind of basic moral or ethical code in the field. Any article is original research and it's not been published elsewhere. But he was taking the same kind of data and kind of rearranging things and rewording things and kind of making some graphs look different and publishing the same research findings in two different journals, making them look like different research projects and different findings, but it was really from the same data set, presenting each as separate, independent, original research. This was found out. What happened to him? Well, first of all, a lot of these science research journals retracted or pulled his articles, although they had already published them. It's kind of like unpublishing. His articles were sort of unpublished, retracted, taken out, erased from the record. And his university took away his PhD because he had cheated on his PhD work. And that can happen. If you get a PhD and it's found out that you fabricated data or plagiarized or something bad like that, they can take away your PhD. And so his PhD was revoked, taken away. So I don't know what he's doing now, but he was a smart guy. I don't know why he did this. He was smart. He had potential. He could have done really well. He could have been famous for discoveries in superconducting electronics. Instead, he's famous for his scandal. And who knows what he's doing now. But his career is over. He's not going to have an academic career or a science career. He's over. He's finished. Two German politicians. So Dr. Huang and the Xin Zheng'an, Jan-Henrik Schering, these were in the early 2000s. Moving on to about, I think, the year 2013, there are two scandals in the same year in Germany. Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg was a member of German parliament, member of the German cabinet, defense minister. He was a rising star in German politics. And he had gotten a PhD in law from a German university before entering politics. He was obviously intelligent. And then when it was discovered that he had plagiarized parts of his PhD dissertation, the Baksa-Nunman. And why he did this, I don't know. He was smart. He should have been able to do it himself. But he plagiarized significant portions of his PhD thesis, dissertation. What happened to him? He had to resign from parliament. His political career was over. And the university stripped him of his PhD. His PhD was revoked. No PhD anymore. After all, imagine spending all those years working hard to get a PhD and it's taken away from you because he did something stupid. It's hard to imagine. Now, one person who was criticizing him harshly at the time for his behavior was Annette Schavan. Schavan was another German member of parliament and a cabinet minister, Minister of Education. Guess what? It was found out she had done the same thing. She had committed plagiarism in her PhD dissertation. Same thing happened to her. She had to resign, her political career was over, and her PhD was revoked. Both in the same year. Jayson Blair, you might have heard of him if you were paying attention to American news. This is about a decade ago. New York Times journalist. He was a rising star at the New York Times. It was discovered that he had kind of made up some of the interviews that he did. He kind of fabricated interviews and interview data, and he was really smart. And why he did this, I don't know. But it was found out that he was fabricating basically data and information for his news articles. He lost his job. His career is over. Why he did this, I don't know. Joseph Biden, you know him? He's running for president now. Not his first time. He's tried several times before to run for president. And I remember I was in college in 1988. Yes, I'm old. I was a college student in 1988, and Biden was running for president then. He was a senator, and at the time, there were three main Democratic candidates running for president, trying to get the job of the main Democratic candidate, the nomination of their party to run against the Republican. The Republican at the time was George H.W. Bush. He's the father of George W. Bush. Biden was caught plagiarizing campaign speeches. He was plagiarizing campaign speeches from a British Labour politician. When this was discovered, he had to drop out of the race, and he went back to the Senate and quietly did his work in the Senate. Hopefully he learned from his mistakes, because he continued to work as a senator for a long time until 2008, when Barack Obama asked him to be his vice presidential running mate, and so he served as vice president under Obama, and now he's running for president. And then in 1988, he had to drop out. Another Democratic candidate, he was a senator, well, he was caught in another scandal. He was having an affair with another woman, not his wife, but another woman. That was a kind of scandal, big scandal back then, and he had to drop out. The remaining Democratic candidate, he was a governor from the state of Massachusetts, a guy named Michael Dukakis. he was a really weak candidate. Okay, a good person, but he was a very weak candidate. He couldn't really campaign effectively against an experienced politician like the Republican George H.W. Bush. Bush won very easily in 1988, which set the stage for his stupid son to become president, George W. Bush, in 2000. And since then, things have only gotten worse with the current president. God. So, thank you, Mr. Biden, for changing history in such a bad way. If Biden hadn't done that, he could have been president, or at least he would have had a really good chance of defeating Bush and becoming president in 1988. But he blew it all away. He just shot it to pieces. He had to he plagiarized. And it's not and I don't want to say he shouldn't have been caught. He just shouldn't have done it, because he would have been caught anyway. If he hadn't been caught, at some time later he would have been caught. The person who discovered that Biden was plagiarizing was the campaign manager for Dukakis, the other Democratic candidate. How he figured it out, I don't know. This was 1988. This was before the internet. We didn't have internet back then. We didn't have email until I finished college. Maybe my last year of college. Email first came out, but it was quite limited to a few, maybe computer science students and professors. It was not a common thing. So before the internet, somehow someone exposed Biden for plagiarizing campaign speeches from a British politician. I don't know how, but now today everything is on the internet. It's easy to find. Even if a professor plagiarized, his dissertation from 20 years ago or 30 years ago, today it's easy to find that out. Everything is online. It's easy. John Walsh was a U.S. Senator about 10 years ago. He had to resign, or at least not run again, when it was discovered that he had plagiarized in his, I think, master's thesis or dissertation or something, his dissertation in college. Diederik Stapel was a famous Dutch psychologist doing social psychology research. It was discovered that he was fabricating data in his research. His career is over. Papers were retracted from academic journals. Finally, you may know the name Shia LaBeouf. He was an actor. And he started writing screenplays for movies, and it was discovered that he had plagiarized from another, I think, writer for one of his own screenplays. Since then, nobody's really heard from him. He's kind of disappeared from public life. It's for committing plagiarism in a movie screenplay and some other weird behavior. Just started acting really strange, and then disappeared. I think his career is over as an actor and as a screenplay writer. So, for us, professors, for graduate students, for college students, what happens if you plagiarize? Well, if you're working in a professional field or academic field, you can lose your job. It would be really stupid to do it. It's so easy today to find out if someone plagiarized. A graduate student, if they plagiarize in a course paper, like a research paper in a course, they can get an F for the course. They might even get kicked out of graduate school, or they might get suspended, like you're suspended. A graduate student can be suspended from graduate school and may be allowed to come back later, but there's a permanent record of plagiarism. Probably won't be able to have an academic career after that. A graduate student can be kicked out of graduate school, and again, no academic future. For college students, the penalties depend on how severe it is. So again, plagiarism can mean copying and pasting words, contents from a source, from an online source, or from a book or printed source. It can mean using information and ideas and not citing the source. And depending on how bad it is, how serious it is, and how intentional it is, the student might be asked to rewrite the paper, redo it, do a substitute assignment, or if it's really bad, a student can get an F for the paper an F for the course. And if it's really serious, there have been cases where students have been, suspended or expelled for maybe serious cases, more often in graduate school because it's more of a serious thing there. And again, in graduate school also, a degree can be taken away from you even after you've worked hard for years getting that degree. If you committed plagiarism, fabricated data, violated ethical rules about how you treat other people in your research, if your research involves, like psychological research, medical research, using other people as subjects, if you treat them badly, of course, you can get into big trouble for that. Now, plagiarism is the more serious end of the spectrum. It's the more extreme. And fabrication maybe being the most extreme, and plagiarism. Now then there are maybe more innocent mistakes that writers can make. It might be not citing one source, forgetting to cite one source, forgetting to properly maybe summarize or paraphrase a couple of sentences, things like that. That's maybe more innocent, more unintentional. Besides plagiarism, more likely students like you, and also American college students, native English speakers too, Canadian, British, American, Australian college students, might have other troubles. Not ethical problems, not moral problems, but more practical problems with using sources. Well, we'll see some examples on, I think it's the next page in the book. I think it's starting page 77 and 78. I have two samples here. There are original examples by a Korean writer, and you see the writer citing sources. And the writer is citing sources using the APA style. We'll talk about the particular systems and styles for citing sources, but you see names and years in parentheses, or name, comma, year in parentheses, or name, parentheses, year, something like that. That's APA style. That's common in linguistics. So you see the original writers, in 1A and 2A, the writers were Koreans. And I want to emphasize that these are not problems of just people like Koreans or Chinese writing in English as a second language. To some degree, these are also problems of college students who are just not used to academic writing, even native English speakers in Western universities writing papers for the first time in their own language. So there are certain problems here that are common to writers. And I want you to look at these examples, compare the original to the revised ones. The revised ones are ones that I revised. I improved upon them a little bit. I want you to look at the differences. Compare, for example, the original and the revised version, page 77 and 78. How are they different? How is the revised one better? And thus, what are the problems in the original version? What problems do you see? So pause the video, look at these for a while, talk to each other about this.